Okay, today I will be doing a presentation about thinking, and if you haven't thought about thinking, I would, because if you wrestle with anything, it all starts up here, and as you think about thinking and you come to see what it is and what it isn't, it's easier to tease yourself out apart from it and put down thinking that doesn't serve you. This is in response to the Mary Poppins story I read recently. Let me just relax for a sec because it's been a minute since I've done this. So in the Mary Poppins story, there was a king, and the king was like, guys, I'm going to get so smart. I'm going to study and know everything and And as he did that, he kind of like pulled himself further and further apart from the life that he had, and it went into disrepair. And so here he was doing this thing he thought was good, which was thinking and acquiring knowledge. And at the same time, while he was doing that, he wasn't present to what he had in a way that it deteriorated. And I think that's something that we can all, in some ways, maybe not all, let's say like most of modern man, woman, can kind of like feel or think, because we have access to so much information, If you consider even just your parents, how many alternatives you can consider for this one thing, like for right now, it's so much, because you know that other people are doing this and that this is possible and you could also be doing that, and here's this business you could start. And so all of these alternate uses of you exist that you're aware of in a way that no one else has ever been aware of before. And it's a lot. And not only are you aware of what else you could be doing for yourself, but you're also aware of what else you could be doing for the whole wide world. And that's beautiful, because in some ways you're considering like, hey, I have a capacity to help. I see that people need help. I don't know what, so there's just all of this pressure that exists around in our minds in a way that does the opposite of what we think it does. And my objective today is to give you some ways to look at that process, to free yourself from it, so that you can act in alignment with what you really want and what you think you're getting by worrying about everything else that you could or should be doing. Okay, and I have on my agenda, I'm going to say why I'm saying this to you. And this is people life is short, and it can be really beautiful. And there's so much suffering that we put ourselves through that's unnecessary. And so my why here is so you can live before you die. And because why not, Okay, so I talked a little bit about the king, and what happened was the king was starting to study all this information, and he was acquiring all of this knowledge, and he got further and further away from his life. So we do this. Our mind has made this case that it's we should think more. But whose idea is that? And what does thinking really accomplish? Let's look at it from a few different angles. So, is this backwards? Okay, bear with me. So let's say you are thinking. You're thinking about something that you want to get in the future. You might be thinking about a state of yourself. You could be thinking, I want to be healed from the trauma of my past. I want to have a degree. I want to have more money. You could be thinking about a thing. I want to have this house. But anyhow, there's this thing in the future that you want to get. And maybe your relationship to growth or achievement or acquisition is already functional and supportive, meaning you're not stressed or worried. When we talk about it like this too, it kind of pulls apart. It's it makes it sound like I'm only talking about things that you want to get, but it's also things you want to avoid. And so at an even simpler level, it could be something like, oh, how do I hold this information from somebody so they don't see this about me? Or it could be, how will I explain this choice that I made so that they can understand? Or how will I, and so there might be, this box represents something in the future that you want to, in some ways, control the outcome of. And like I'm saying, it could be something material, oh, I have this thing, or it could be something intangible, like I have allowed for, or I have given this person information enough so that they conclude this thing. So you've got this thing, and you're right here in the star. So you've got the thing in the future, and you're in this star. Why do you want to do this? Just kick back and ask, what is the point of this thing that you are thinking about incessantly? Oh, I bet somewhere you think that in the having of this, you'll feel better, or you'll feel good. There's an answer here. There is a sensation here, because remember, it doesn't matter what the hell is outside. It all still happens inside. You could be sitting on Fiji on this cool ass beanbag chair and still be having a shit time if you're thinking about, oh, do I look okay in my swimming suit? Or are other people gonna, see how cool I am? Like, who knows? But it doesn't matter what's happening outside. It all still happens inside, good, bad, whatever. It all is still determined up here, how you interpret what's happening. So when we look at trying to control circumstances or things happening, it's like, okay, well, I guess underneath it all, I'm afraid if I don't get this, I won't be happy, or I won't have done a good job, or while we do this, so we're contemplating this thing we want to control so that we'll feel good, we squish the good feelings we could have right now because we're worried about this later. You see how silly this is? So you have a right now where, again, it's all happening inside. You could make the choice to say, like, how do I assign meaning to this in a way that allows for me to enjoy it? And why might you want to do that? In this diagram, if you saw my presentation on the Stephen Covey thing, you might recognize this. On the bottom in this bigger block, I have, let's say here, and this is things people can see. This is what's happening. In response to here, you have thoughts and feelings. These are unique to you. We sometimes forget that these are unique to us. We think because this is here, everybody is thinking this. Everybody is feeling that. They're not. Just you. Your experience of how you interpret this is unique. And how you interpret this, what you can see, determines how you feel. So it's not this that leads your emotional experience. Hey guys, it's this. How are you thinking about it? And so let's say like you start to get hip to that game and you're like, you're right, Shay. It does matter how I think about what's happening. So then you start to think about how you're thinking. And that's a fun game to play. This is helpful in some ways, so you can start to sort out what's there that you don't need. However, I'll tell you a trick in a little bit. And then, so let's say you get hip to that game and you start thinking about how you're thinking and feeling. You're like, you're really upset about that. Like, you shouldn't be upset. You know better. This isn't scary. And so you have what's happening, how you naturally or how you first think or feel about what's happening, and then how you think or feel about how you think or feel. And by now you're probably a little overwhelmed because there's just this, and then all of this is happening on the inside. And then you might start to be concerned about how you think and feel about how you think and feel because this all gets overwhelming. And so here's this experience that you're having about right here. And instead of your hands or your focus or your bandwidth being on right here, where this is the only place you can do stuff, this is the only place you can move things, it's all spread out over here, all dispersed in space and time. So that is why if you start to really look for commonalities across, let's say even religion or some of the self-development practices, or I guess any of the literature around meditation, Where are we trying to go? What's the point? The point, my friends, is to be able to accept here all therapy, all trauma work, all healing, all starseed stuff. It's all ultimately for you to understand enough to let this be what it is. So you can be here. So you can explain here a jillion different ways. And this is the crux of the irony of thinking. Let's say that you have the best words ever to explain why you think and feel about why you think and feel about why you think and feel and what's here. Is that possible? Can you ever really understand something? So I don't follow current events at all anymore because I want to enjoy my life, and that shit's crazy. I know Jeff Bezos is in the news right now because I do look at a couple people's Instagram feeds, and so I see a meme. But anyhow, like before there was that, there is a brilliance that allowed for whatever Amazon became. And maybe brilliance isn't the best word because is it really holistic? Who fuck knows? But at the beginning of a book someone wrote about him called The Everything Store, he's like, look, I don't really want a story written about me because when you look back, you can tell any story you want. And that's the truth. Like, that's the truth. So if you have a beautiful thinking mind, you can pretty much explain stuff any way you want. Any way you want. And that, at a very basic level, that's let's put judgment aside and look simply at time. Context, such as time, changes whether you call something good or bad. There is a parable or a story about a Zen farmer, and you might have heard me say before, but essentially like the Zen farmer, one of his horses runs off, and his neighbor's like, well, that sucks. And the farmer's like, we'll see. And then the horse came back, and he brought some wild horses with him, and his neighbor was like, that's so great, you're so lucky. And the farmer was like, we'll see. And then one of the new horses kicked his son and hurt him. And the neighbor was like, oh, that sucks. And the farmer's like, we'll see. And then the boy didn't get drafted, and then blah, blah, blah. And so here's this chain of events where at any given time you can assign a value of like, this is good, this is bad. But do you know for real, is it good or bad concretely forever? So that's just the context of time. Now let's look at the context of space. I have a marker here. Let's say I spent the next 5 years of my life studying this marker. I knew everything there was to know about this, but I couldn't because this marker exists in something that like you're not it's not separate from everything else. A flower, if you understood a flower completely and perfectly, you couldn't really without also understanding a bee. And if it had to include a bee, then you would also have to include, I don't know, like other bugs, etc. So it's like, even if you perfectly understood something in isolation, it exists in a system. And building on that idea, you know what's really trippy to think about? So here's science, and science is like, don't worry guys, I got you. But science also knows that what is observed is affected by the observer. And so all of science, all of life is basically looking at itself. It's chasing its own tail. And so how could you understand something wholly in which you were a part of? So there's like all of these ideas we have about like, oh, let me understand how that happened so that, and this is a good lead into the next part. Why do you want to understand? Why are you abstracting yourself away from here? Why are you leaving what's present and what you can touch to go into your mind to understand? What do you think we'll find there? Is it a way to avoid pain? Is it so you won't hurt in the future? Is it so that you can control things so that you might be happy? Well, isn't it silly? Because when you're there in your mind trying to control those later things, you're not here where you could already have those things. Already have those things. And so the practice is not how to it's not how do you get anywhere, but how do you get here? How do you let yourself be here? Because this is where everything is. If you're trying to get to somewhere later, it's generally a set of circumstances where you think you would be able to feel comfortable enough to be just here as you are. And so you think, well, I bet I could feel that way if I was skinnier. I bet I could feel that way if somebody loved me more. I bet I could feel that way if those people didn't know I did that thing. No, no, that's conditional. Everything you want is here. You get there here. Let me see. Yes, girl. Yes. And so here's this king, going back to the Mary Poppins story, and I cried when I read the last portion because, hello, I've been hunting down the universe full time, at the expense of everything I could touch. Was it divine? Absolutely. Can I understand how or why all that came to be? And this is for my trauma folk. So you might have seen my first line at supernormalswag.com, and it was ask me about my spaceship. And my spaceship was essentially how I left everything as I was taught it to see it from another vantage point. And doing that, seeing above the associations that I was taught here, allowed me to exist beyond them. When we make these judgments about what's happening here and how we should feel, a lot of them are learned. Nobody necessarily is sitting across from you as a child and saying and when this happens with your first relationship, feel this. And as you go through and compare yourself to your peers, do this. No one is expressly saying these things to you, but they're kind of saying them to you. If you watch television, if you watch the news, even when you read. I was reading Harry Potter again the other day, and I love Harry Potter. I love me some magic. And there are some interpersonal dynamics expressed through the conversations that reinforce limited thinking about self and other. It's okay, nobody can handle how I really think and feel. Let me hide it. And so everybody goes around hiding themselves, and nobody feels comfortable because they're busy hiding themselves. And it's all of this irony where it doesn't have to be that way. Why can't we all acknowledge that we all think and feel uniquely and in strange ways, in some ways that don't make sense, and none of it has to be personal? So when I'm talking about the spaceship, somehow, and this is going back to the trauma, it got really uncomfortable for me on Earth, blessedly. And so maybe because I couldn't handle it here, or maybe because I was supposed to do that. Who knows? I can't understand. But this is somehow I got to see that the ways we're taught to interpret here aren't helpful. They're ironic, and they take us out of our power. And so rather than making a beeline or a direct action towards something that we really want, we think all these things that prevent us. And so we just get smaller and smaller and sadder, and less energy is available to us because wherever we put it, we don't think we can go anywhere. And the reason I say about trauma is if you have been through some shit, you might think oh man, here's some stuff I can't do. It's difficult for me to trust people. It's hard for me to focus. I'm not able to allow love in. And while that might be true, there are some other things that you got because of that. And if you can allow yourself to embrace it as if it wasn't wrong, as if in some ways you get in your spaceship was a gift, then you get to integrate the experience that was here and also kind of cash in on the super adaptations or the mutations that you got by not being able to be here. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I think it does. But the point is what you call things is how you experience them. And so if you call something trauma and you think of yourself as a victim and you put yourself in a disempowered place, by golly, that'll be your experience, and it's gonna suck. It'll be real uncomfortable until you consider, like, hey, maybe because I wasn't able to use my voice in that situation, maybe because I learned to overcompensate for other people's emotions, I learned something else I might be able to use. And as you start to change the conversation and you say, well, I don't really know what this means. Maybe it could mean more than I've allowed for. What's here? What can I do here? How do I feel here? The ways that okay, I'm moving pretty fast. We'll take a second. Okay, so let me recap back a little bit. So I started by saying, when we are in our heads, we're trying often to control some sort of circumstance, either by understanding what happened before or trying to forecast and anticipate and plan around what might happen later. We might also be, so that's like linear, we might also be in space somewhere where we're thinking about what else we could be doing or what other people are doing. And so we're essentially in our heads and not present because we think we might be missing something or we might have to suffer some kind of discomfort or mental or emotional pain later, or physical. When we're doing that, ironically, we're taking ourselves out of the experience that we're trying to have via conditions. I could, if I let myself accept that this is where I am, I can feel what I think I would get by having certain circumstances in place, both internal and external. So external circumstances are like, I have money for this. Internal circumstances are, I think about that differently. However you think about it now, if you let how you think about it right now be okay, it loses its power over you. When you're pushing against something all the time, all you're really focused on is what you're pushing against. And that's what you don't want. How silly is that? How silly. And for one reason or another, we're trained to interact with experience like that. But it doesn't make any sense at all. I talked about these layers. Here, which gives us a feeling, and then we might have thoughts and feelings about our thoughts and feelings, and we might have thoughts and feelings about thoughts and feelings about our thoughts and feelings. It takes some work to get to right here. It's really beautiful. It's difficult to explain. It's kind of like, imagine a maze. In the maze, you have the action that you want to take. It's in the center. Your mind says, here are all the things you have to do to get to that thing in the center. But it learned those. And what you learn isn't complete. It couldn't be, because everything that isn't known, for one. And for two, your individual exposure to possibilities is limited. If you grew up in a small town and nobody wore pink hair, then you don't even think it's possible to wear pink hair. Why would you wear pink hair? But if you live somewhere else, you might not know there's not pink hair. And so you think in the confines of your limited experience. And so if you want to wear pink hair in your small town, if the idea somehow comes to you, you might think of all these things you have to do to make that okay, when you could just wear pink hair and be done with it. And all of the other concerns you had about how's this going to be interpreted? Will I be judged? None of it's real. None of it's real. Thanks, Ian. It's pretty bizarre, but what I found, so if you've been around for the ride, I started in consulting, and then after Paige died, I was like, nah, I'm gonna go chase my dream. I didn't know what that was, but I jumped and I went, and I landed in fitness and nutrition coaching, and I'm like, I'm gonna help people this way. And then when I was there, I was like, why is it hard for people to do what they want? Self included. Why is it that I can't take action consistently on things that I want? And you see this for people all over. They want to eat less, or they want to exercise more, or they want to do they want to stand up for themselves, or they want to quit their job, and they don't. They don't. Why is that? And so I started tugging on that thread and started to see these different factors that influence behavior, and eventually like fell off this reality, blessedly, and saw kind of like what was underneath everything. And underneath all of it is, it's like, it's misidentity. And misidentity means you think that you think you're who you think you are, but you're not that. You learned some ways to describe yourself. You learned from your environment what's okay for you to do and what's not just from like a pink hair standpoint, but is it okay for me to express my needs? Am I allowed to be different? Like, you learn all these things and you act as if you were that, but you're not that. And so at the top of behavior is identity. And from all that I could tell, our mind really truly is the limit. And we learn these ways to play this game of, how do I get something later from here? And when we, like, this whole thing is largely in the mind. And we, that sense of like what we're trying to get to, the feelings of what we're trying to get here, that's who you are. That's what you are. And it sounds, I'm sure, from some vantage points, like sort of strange, but like as real as I can give it to you, like if you didn't know that you shouldn't feel good, that's how you default. That's how you'd land. If you didn't know the reasons why you shouldn't like yourself, if you didn't know the reasons why what somebody else was doing was bad or wrong, like you would be like in peace. And there is a line there, and this is something that took me several go-rounds to really accept. Just be like, in that place of, hey, this is okay, if something doesn't feel okay in that place, you're allowed to respond to it in a way that you say, hey, that doesn't feel good. And when you do that, you reinforce trust in yourself, which means you don't have to think about later scenarios or past scenarios when you got hurt or where you might get hurt, because you know if you're somewhere and it hurts, you'll say something and you'll leave. And so here's this beautiful model for freedom, where you recognize or allow that your natural default state is like, this isn't bad, like this is pretty nice. And when you're there, you do more. One of the main things I learned facilitating behavior change is that people naturally do things that are good for them when they feel good. If they let themselves be nice to themselves, if they let themselves rest, relax, and take care of themselves, they want to grow. They want to read that extra book because it feels good. It feels good to grow. They want to exercise. They want to, and so we're pushing ourselves all the time, pushing to get to a place where we would feel good. But if you let yourself feel good, you don't have to push to get to anywhere else. Yes, you have to be aware of when something is new and uncomfortable and allow yourself to lean in. But you don't have to stand behind yourself and push and yell, because you want to do it. You want to grow your life. It's incredible. So it takes a little bit to kind of like get behind everything so that it's like there's no magic pill. Except there is kind of, and that's what I was talking about here, where acceptance. If you can, all you have to do is practice being right here without explanation, without any kind of, well, maybe I understand, like, don't explain it, don't excuse it, don't try to be somewhere else. Like, if you can get yourself right here and say, like, maybe all these shitty circumstances are perfect. Maybe in the seeds of this disaster, maybe in this terrible obstacle, maybe this awful loss is somehow okay. If you can get yourself there, it starts to move. And it's like, it's magic. the other part of identity, so at the very top, when I was sort of saying like what really influences behavior, if you can get to a place where you respect yourself, which is a little bit different than love. I think if you can get to respect first, then the love part comes naturally. If you can get there, everything else changes. And I'm saying respect first because when we go back to this bee and the flower example, where they're not separate, you have something that everybody else needs, or you wouldn't be here. Because this system, this is a complete system. When we talk about Earth being one, we don't need to do it from like some Brahmin, Hindu space. Legit, we're in an ecosystem. All of us are interconnected. There is no other. We're all in this organism called Earth and beyond. There is nothing that's separate. You look, it's like the cells in your body are different, but they're all the same fucking body. And similarly, we're all here together. And so you are a steward of something that's good for everybody because somehow it all forced you into being. And the healthier you are, the healthier the system is. You as an individual cell matter because you're part of every other cell. Nothing is not you. And so if you can start to respect that, hey, I have something, even just your health, your well-being, you have something that is connected to everybody else. This is yours. This is what you steward, yourself, your body, your mind, your heart, your emotions. You belong to everybody. And so if you can start to respect that you are part of a bigger system, it's easier to be well, I guess it does matter if I take care of myself. It does matter if I speak up about what matters to me. Your individual well-being affects everybody else's well-being. And then from there, as you start to allow for yourself to exist, as you start to allow for your experience, then you can start to love yourself because it does feel good and it makes sense. When you love something, you take care of it. It doesn't mean that, you're standing like this, your hair looks so good today. No, it's I love you enough to brush your teeth. I love you enough to, give you a shot at what you really care about. That then moves through you, and in that model, you don't need force. You don't need force. You do, again, need some practice and leaning into discomfort where you start to when you start to learn that not everything is for you. Just because you can bend to fit into every little box doesn't mean you have to. In fact, when you bend to fit in a little box, then that means you're not in your box. And if you're not in your box, then you're not doing your thing. And if you're not doing your thing, then sort of that interplay. So yeah, it's a little uncomfortable at first letting what's not yours drop. But it's worth it. And also as you do it, you sort of teach other people, it's okay. You don't have to be for everything. You don't have to be for everybody. It's okay. It's okay. How many questions so far? Okay. So I'll say, I think I've talked a lot already. Let's see what else. Okay, so another thing about being present. So let's say your mind is making another argument for itself where it's let me think about all this stuff. Let me analyze this. When you do that, you're not here. So we can just agree that if your focus isn't here, then you're not here. And I play brain games every day on Lumosity, or most days. And I recommend it. It's good. And it, everything, it all has, there are lessons for life in everything. No matter what you're doing, it's wise. If you interact with it, it's all got information for you. And what I noticed, and you could, I think, Inner Game of Tennis talks about this too, I'm either playing the game, I'm either with the game, or I'm thinking about how I played last time, or I'm thinking about something completely there. But if I'm not with the game, I'm not playing my best. And so it really is just this practice of coming to a place where it's it's okay to be right here. And when you can come right here, your awareness, your bandwidth, your ability to touch here is here. And when it's here, you do pretty well because you're here. So you're with the information that's present, and that's what affects your future, not your understanding of later. Your actions in this moment is what makes later. See what I'm saying? See this note. You caught it, it's okay, Mo. Yeah, okay to be yourself. Hell yeah. That's the ultimate message. And like, I could cry about this, but I've been doing this work since I've been on my little trip since 2013. And I was like, I'm going to help people get fit. I'm going to help people with their emotions. I'm going to help people with their mind. I'm going to help people do this better. I'm going to help them ascend. No, the only thing anybody ever needs to do is be themselves right now. You get here as yourself, and that's it. That's the only place to go. When you're there, you can do anything. There's some Zen quote that's like, having nowhere to go and nothing to be, I can go anywhere, or nothing to do, I can go anywhere and do anything. And fuck if that isn't true. Will all of this be transcended? Possibly. I don't know. But from where I am right now, all of these years, like in the field, the most powerful thing you can be is yourself. Because again, like, somehow you're in this system. Somehow you, uniquely, you matter. And the more that you can let yourself be you, the only thing you really can be, the better it is for everybody. At a very, like, let's say that there isn't some like cool trinket that you're bringing. At a very basic level, if you allow yourself to be yourself, your mental and emotional health is good. And when your mental and emotional health is good, your physical health is good, or at least better. And if you're there, then you're able to act or contribute better, and your relationship's better, and you make better financial choices, and your ability to be a functioning cell in the overall body of humanity is better. And so who cares if there's ever like if you have some like divine purpose? From a very practical standpoint, it makes sense to let you be yourself. And geez Louise, isn't it fun? It's so much easier. It's so much easier. Actually, Kelly, I think you had a quote in your IG profile like a few years ago that maybe still there, but it was like, I've tried to be a lot of things, but I don't know, the only thing that worked was myself. And that hit me then. And I wasn't there. I was still trying to be something else. I was trying to be smarter, or more aware, or more perfect at this, I'm this. And it grows and changes all the time, but I don't need to be anything but this. Being yourself means this is how I feel and think right now. This is what I want right now. And it doesn't mean that you have to understand those things or explain them or take them somewhere or get it. Like, all you have to do is to be yourself, is be with your experience. And over time, as you are with your experience, your choices start to reflect that. And then you start to look like yourself and talk like yourself and act like yourself, because you are yourself. You are with yourself. You are with your individual experience. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Let me look back here. Thanks, guys, for all the little notes. Okay. All right, so that concludes my presentation on thinking. And I did this because of the Mary Poppins story about the king and the cat. And I think it's just, we get really sold on this idea of the intellect. Let me be smart. Let me understand. If you are on that train, give yourself a hug. Because, like, that's great. You're right where you're supposed to be. Like, there's nothing bad or wrong about that. Being on that train somehow has gotten you from wherever you were to where you are right now. No judgment. Let it be. If you're on that train and you're looking for what might be interesting to explore next, and this sparkles to you, not because I said it, because it's yours, ask why. You want to understand. What's that? And it's not to say to push away things that you're naturally curious about or interested in, or things that make you happy to interact with. Things aren't random. If there is a natural resonance for you, I dare say it's part of your gear here. If I judged me, I'd be like, Shaylee, what? Are you reading Mary Poppins? You're 30 something. But I love it. And you know what? I'll probably write a children's book. And you know what? Even if I don't, like, I love it. That's great. Like, this is what I'm happy to do. So whatever is, I'll show you these little, so I got this at artprint.com. They have a bunch. And then poster frames are kind of expensive. I got this at Amazon. It's just 2 magnetic clips, and you put them at the top and the bottom. And so if you're looking for art for your wall, I totally recommend. So my point there was like, destination 1 is like here as yourself, and whatever sparkles to you from there, great. And if you have some momentum from the other stuff, great. Like, it's okay. It takes a while to pull who you think you are and who you actually are into the same place. And if it doesn't happen tomorrow, you don't need to be mad about it. It must be perfect. You're always picking up things, and the system, whatever it is, seems self-optimizing in some way. And so I used to like tell myself all the time, like, oh, let's work it out for the best. And then I saw that my mind had that idea. No ideas are real. All illusions are equal in their unreality. And so I lost that one, and that was to digest, because I was like, then for what? It just is. And I hope that this was helpful. If you have any feedback or anything you'd like to ask more, send me a message or an email at Shaylee@habitbook.com. I do work with people one-on-one and helping them kind of like untangle themselves from their mind. And I do, the way that it works right now is a person comes on, if they're doing a package, we have an onboarding session. They say like, this is who I am, this is what I have going on, this is what and somehow like I use a lot of intuition, guided. I'll take that, create a bridge for them, and then over a course of 2 to 4 months, we just start to peel back all the stuff they don't need anymore, all the thoughts, all of the ways that their mind thinks they should be, and all the ways their mind thinks so I don't tell them what they should be. I show them why what they think they need isn't correct. And when you see it, you're like, oh. And then once you know, like, you don't really want to do it anymore. Like, why go that way? I kind of explain it like, let's say you're walking home from work the same way every day. And then I'm like, hey, like, if you're trying to maximize your time back, there's this other road. You might, whenever you're not paying attention, do the old one because you always did the old one, but you'll naturally take the one that's shorter because you want to get home. And it's the same thing. So all I do is help someone see where what they thought they needed to be or do isn't correct. And it's nice. That's a real blessing. It takes all of the resistance or most of the resistance out of their system, and then they can just kind of live and like be themselves. And I want to thank everybody for coming today and for your feedback and for being along over the years. It's been a ride. If there's any topic here that's really interesting to you that you'd like me to expand on, I'd love to know that as well. Or anything that particularly resonated, or even the things that weren't helpful, just any kind of feedback. That's why I always ask at the end of my presentations, was this helpful? Because like, I don't know, where people like, where's everybody at? What do they need? Thank you so much, everybody.